Hey, what's up everyone? I'm Craig, it's mid-November and we are in my tropical style garden in the southwest of the UK. Now, I've got about an hour left of sunlight before the sun goes down, and it's been quite a mild autumn so far, so I thought I'd just show you around the Grow Paradise garden, which is my showcase garden of exotic and tropical style plants that we can get away with growing here in the UK. Now, like I say, I'm in the south of the UK, so the autumns are more mild than you would get further north or in colder parts of the country, and I can experiment and get away with some more weird and wonderful plants here. So it's actually surprising even me how tropical and exotic and lush my garden is looking even at this time of year. Now, one plant that I grew from seed that has done really well this year, with the slightly cooler summer with a lot of cloudy cover, is Muschia wollastonii, and this is a stunning plant from Madeira, and you can see this is probably just over a year old from seed now, and it forms this beautiful big rosette of lance-shaped leaves with a really heavily serrated edge. Now, this plant looks a bit like echium before they flower, but it's in a completely different family, and it will grow into an enormous rosette, probably still this size again, maybe double this size, and this is probably about 1 meter wide at the moment. And in its second or third year, it forms a flower spike that is covered in almost a cloud of tiny orchid-looking flowers. Now, this is the yellow flowering form. You can get a reddy, orangey flowering form as well, but this one is relatively tender. So long as the weather stays as mild as it has been, this might get through winter and we might be able to see the flowers forming next year. If we do get any frosts forecast, I'm going to put a layer of fleece over this because it is planted out into the ground, because I wanted it to become established so that it can get nice and big and we can see the full effect of the leaves. But this one is going to need a bit of extra protection if any cold is forecast, but I just wanted to share it with you now, just in case this is the last time we can see it looking so good, because who knows what the winter's kind of got lined up for our gardens. Next up is this plant. Now, this is Boehmeria platyphylla, and this is a plant that's in the nettle family, although it's a stingless relative, so there's nothing to worry about. And I've featured this on the Grow Paradise YouTube channel quite a lot. Now, I've really enjoyed growing this plant because it's proved hardy for me in zone 9A. The stem goes woody, which I've mentioned before. Woody stems are a lot more hardy than anything herbaceous. And by herbaceous, I just mean soft, fresh green material, which is normally the fresh new growth on plants. Now, these big round leaves have a really nice texture and again a serrated edge, and they contrast beautifully against the palmate leaves that so many of us grow in tropical style gardens. So the leaves on Fatsia polycarpa, Schefflera taiwaniana, they sort of need something, a complete leaf like this, a great big round leaf, to contrast against them, to showcase the best of them all. If you have a whole garden that's just full of one type of leaf, it all sort of gets a bit lost. So this plant has served really well as kind of a contrast leaf, and I think it's a bit of a hero plant on its own. Now, I'm really pleased to say that along this stem here, there are flowers forming, and the flowers are being pollinated and producing seed. So hopefully I'll be able to grow a lot of this Boehmeria for the Grow Paradise nursery next year. Now, my Brassaiopsis mitis, which is probably one of the most desirable plants amongst tropical style gardeners here in the UK at least, has done so well this year. I think the slightly cooler summer with cloudy weather and frequent rainfall has given it the exact environment that it wants, and it's pushed out so many of these really beautiful and unique snowflaked leaves. Now, this one is planted out into my garden, so I'm hoping, like I say, it's quite a mild winter, and that's not to say it can't tolerate it. Brassaiopsis mitis is said to be hardy down to minus 13 degrees Celsius, but because they're so hard to get hold of, I'm going to be extra cautious with cold weather. So I will wrap the stem, even though it is woody, just to protect it in case there's any severe cold, because to have a leaf like this growing in a garden in the UK is just amazing. They look super tropical, and like I say, this leaf contrasting against that Boehmeria round leaf is the exact contrast that I was talking about. And in a garden, I like to have weird and wonderful foliage. Like I say, next year I think I'm going to add quite a few flowers, but that's not to say I'm going to forego foliage. I'm definitely going to keep these big, unique, jungly leaves in the Grow Paradise garden as well. Now, something unusual that's happened this year is usually I will start taking cuttings from the plants in my garden around late August, September time, because traditionally with the seasons, that's when it's been best to propagate plants before the frosts move in and they stop actively growing. So I took cuttings just as I normally do, like on this Fuchsia Boliviana, which is an amazing exotic fuchsia that is half hardy in the UK. And at the time I'm usually taking cuttings, I'm anticipating that the plant's going to be frosted off not long after, and it's going to stop actively growing. But this year, the mild weather has meant that the tip where I've cut has continued growing, and it's sending off all these side shoots all the way up the stem, which is good news if we do have a mild winter, because this fuchsia could grow into almost the size of a small tree by next season. But we don't know. It's going to be an experiment. This fuchsia is planted out in the ground as well. It's half hardy, so the woody parts of the stem, I've got my fingers crossed, will survive, but I have taken cuttings and saved seed as well. And this is something I say so much. If you're going to experiment with tropical style gardening, by all means plant things outside, half hardy plants or even tender plants, and experiment with what you can get away with in your garden. But take backups, save seeds and take cuttings, because then if you do lose the plant, it's fine. You're going to have backups for next season, and so many of these plants grow quickly, so it won't take too long for it to fill out the space that your old plant was filling up in your tropical style garden. And that plant towering above me there is my mountain papaya, Vasconelia pubescens. And this plant hasn't proved hardy in any of the gardens that I've seen experimenting with it. Now, it will take colder temperatures provided it's got cover from rain. It seems to hate being close to 0 degrees Celsius and wet. It's just going to cause it to rot. Now, this plant is actually still in a pot, just plunged into the ground. And every winter before now, I've moved it into the greenhouse and overwintered it, but you've seen the height that it is. There's no way that this plant is going to fit into the greenhouse this year. So I'm forced to experiment. Now, I'm hoping the fact that it's in its pot still, plunged into the ground but above ground level, means that the drainage is going to really be helped, and it's going to help any winter rain run away from kind of where the stem meets the roots, just to prevent any rot, because rot is the arch enemy of anyone trying to get tropical style plants through winter. But there's another reason I don't want to disturb it. It's producing fruit. Now, in an earlier video, I said that papaya plants only have one type of flower on, meaning you need a male plant and a female plant in order to produce fruit. But plants being plants don't always read the rule book, and this one is producing quite a lot of fruit. These are the three largest. There's another papaya here, one behind that, and a few more forming up there. I think time's going to tell whether these fruit have any seeds in, and if they do, whether the seeds are going to be viable. It might be producing sterile fruit, or I could be completely wrong. Now, I'm going to leave these fruit on this plant as long as possible. At the moment, the plant's forming kind of a natural frost shelter with the foliage held above these fruits. If we do get any severe cold forecast, I will take them off and try and ripen them on a sunny windowsill. But subscribe if you're not already to this channel, and follow along, because we're going to try and save these fruits and grow our own papayas in the UK, just like we have here. Now, I love this plant not only for the fruit, but you get these enormous tropical leaves, and it chucks out so many leaves when it's happy. Now, it's called a mountain papaya because it originates from high altitude regions, and I've said over and over again that high altitude plants make great potential plants for British gardens because they can tolerate colder temperatures. And it's in autumn that this plant, this mountain papaya, seems to have grown the most. I'm going to say it's added maybe 2 or 3 foot in the past 4 to 5 weeks, and it's now that it's producing the most amount of flowers and fruit. So I'm hoping I don't lose it this winter. And I haven't got any young plants. I haven't been able to back it up, so I've got all my hopes pinned on those fruits ripening and having viable seed inside. Even my Colocasia pink china is still in leaf, and it looks completely unscathed. Now, the garden has dropped down to 2 degrees at night so far, but luckily there wasn't any signs of frost. And this plant, being in such a dense bed behind me with so much foliage above it, I think is in a bit of a warmer microclimate. So to have such lush, tropical looking leaves, in mid-November in the UK is a real achievement. Now this Colocasia pink china is hardy, and I've mentioned before it's a great one to try in the UK if you can get your hands hold of one, because I can leave it out in the garden and it grows back just as any other common herbaceous perennial would. So it's definitely a plant worth trying if you're after that tropical or exotic vibe in your garden, but you don't want all the faff of overwintering these plants in a greenhouse or your garage or anything like that. This is a great plant to add to a tropical style garden for low effort. Down here is another plant, Setaria Palmifolia, which looks like a palm seedling, hence the name Palmifolia. It's actually a tropical grass. This one's been really happy, planted underneath some bananas here. It's thrived in the warm shade of summer, and at this time of year it's producing seed heads. Now I've actually ordered seeds for this plant before and I've never had any luck, and my suspicion is that the seeds were old seed that the supplier sent that just weren't viable anymore. But I've got 2 plumes of seed heads, no 3, I've just seen another there, and they're producing tiny flowers at the moment, so I'm hoping we're going to have time before I get a frost here down in Dorset that these seeds are going to be pollinated and I'm going to be able to save them and then grow so much more of this plant, because it's a really tropical looking leaf, great big long leaves. It can grow up to about 60 centimeters tall, and it just makes for a really jungly foliage kind of underlayer, a sub-shrub plant beneath things like the banana plants that I've got here, or the Brassaiopsis mitis. So I'm hoping to add a lot more of this to my garden next year. We've had a number of storms in recent weeks, so the canopy has been ripped of all of its leaves, all of that autumn foliage that was giving the garden some colour at this time of year. But it's okay. We've planted deciduous trees intentionally because, one, it's going to give autumn colour, which is something my wife always said she wanted in our garden, but 2, with us losing the leaves in the canopy of our tropical style garden in winter, it allows that lower winter sun to come in and keep everything as warm as possible, and that's going to really help our half-hardy and tender experimental plants that we leave out have the best possible chances of surviving the cold weather of winter, because if we can allow as much winter sun as possible into the garden, then it's going to defrost any heavy ice, any frosts, any snow that we get, and it's going to keep the ground as warm as possible. So that's sort of a great tip that I would add if you're looking to grow a tropical style garden. Add some trees that give you canopy cover in summer, that protects the plants below from the worst of that scorching and drying sun, but they will open up in winter and allow as much sunlight in as possible so that you get the best of both worlds. Now on this roost tree behind me, I've got these tropical tender bromeliads that have been out here all summer long, and they're coloured up really, really nicely now, because the more sunlight they get, the richer the coloration becomes, and where the canopy's opened up, they're really fully exposed. Now I'm in no rush to take these indoors just yet. I think these will stay out as an experiment until we get temperatures around about 0 degrees Celsius, if we get that in this garden, because they're up in the canopy, so they should be protected from the worst of the cold, which is going to be down at ground level. I've taken some of the pups off as backup plants, like I say, so I'm not too worried if I lose these. The backup plants are in the greenhouse and protected and nice and warm. So I feel quite lucky actually that in November, mid-November in the UK, I'm still able to enjoy such colourful exotic plants outside. All of the Fatsia in the garden are coming into their own at this time of year as well. These are sort of the stalwarts that fall to the back of the show in spring and summer, when all of the tropical style plants are rushing to race to be the star of the show, and the Fatsia sort of drops back into the background a little bit. But as all of the herbaceous plants disappear as we approach winter, then tough evergreens like this really come into their own and hold the garden together and keep it looking good all year round. But in November, kind of in mid to late autumn, as we approach winter, we get these flowers that form, and they're very similar to ivy flowers because these plants are in the same family. They're all in Herbaceous, and these flowers are absolutely loved by pollinating insects. So to be able to provide passing pollinators, local wildlife, with food at this time of the year is great for me. I don't want my garden to be sterile and just something that the gardener enjoys. I really want it to be something that wildlife benefits from too. So if I can find plants that keep me happy as a gardener and keep the local wildlife happy, then that's a winning plant for me. So Fatsia is a definite one to add to your gardens, and it's another really low maintenance plant that will thrive in partial shade. Some of them like a bit of sun. Fuchsia polycarpa likes a bit of sun, and you can get variations like this variegated form behind me with the white splodges on the leaf margins that really add and brighten up a shady part of the garden. Now that was just a really quick look around my tropical style garden in the south of the UK, just to show you some of the surprises that I've experienced this late in the season, some of the plants that are still surviving and still actively growing in November in the UK. Comment below and let me know how you're all getting on. If there's any surprises in your gardens, I'd love to hear from you. And don't forget, we've got the Gardeners social network at growparadise.social. It's free to create an account and you can post pictures of your gardens there, so we can all discuss what's happening in our gardens wherever we are in the world. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit subscribe and I will see you all in the next one.